I stared at the two figures across the conference table, my face a mask of perfect neutrality despite the words still hanging in the air. Effective immediately. Your salary will be adjusted down by 45%. Your new role is assistant to Mr. Travis Wentley. The silence that followed felt like an explosion. I kept my eyes locked on Oliver Renshaw, our newly appointed CEO, and Miriam from HR, who looked like she wanted to disappear from the room entirely. I said nothing, asked no questions, showed no reaction. Because when you've spent nearly 20 years protecting and building a company, only to be replaced by a child who sits in a position of power thanks to carrying the CEO's last name, you don't need to shout. You just need to wait. Wait until the entire system collapses under the weight of their own mistakes. My name is Ava Morell. Until 10 minutes ago, I was the internal audit director at Strathvale Metrics, a financial technology firm that I helped build from its rocky beginnings into the powerhouse it is today. 18 years of my life invested in ensuring this company's compliance, preventing millions in potential fines, and building systems that became industry standards. And now, I was being demoted to an assistant, to a 27-year-old who couldn't tell the difference between GAAP and a gap in his resume. Do you have any questions, Ava? Miriam asked, her voice small and uncomfortable. I gathered my leather portfolio and stood, smoothing my charcoal pencil skirt. When does this transition take effect? Immediately, Oliver answered, his voice flat. He hadn't even bothered to look up from his phone. Travis will expect you at his office by noon. I nodded once and walked out, keeping my spine straight and my chin level. Not until I reached the sanctuary of the women's restroom did I allow myself to grip the marble countertop. Knuckles white, breathing controlled. 1 deep breath in, hold for 4, release for 7. A technique I'd mastered during the 2008 financial crisis when we almost lost everything. The woman in the mirror looked back at me with steel in her eyes. At 45, I had earned every fine line around my eyes and the streak of silver in my dark hair. But I didn't look defeated, I looked dangerous. My phone buzzed with a calendar invite. Onboarding to new role, Travis Wentley's office, 12 p.m. I straightened my blouse, reapplied my signature red lipstick, and whispered to my reflection, they have no idea who they're dealing with. I had 3 hours before noon, more than enough time to begin. The Strathvale Metrics headquarters occupied the top 8 floors of a gleaming skyscraper in the financial district. My former office, now likely being measured for Travis's new furniture, had a view of the bay that I'd earned through years of protecting this company from its own worst impulses. I made my way to the 37th floor, where the IT department resided. Simon Chen had been our head of cybersecurity for nearly a decade, and he owed me several favors. Ava, he said, genuine surprise on his face when I appeared in his doorway. I just got the email about the restructuring. Is it true? Every word, I replied, closing his office door behind me. Which is why I need to talk to you before the system permissions change. Simon looked uncomfortable, but gestured for me to sit. What can I do for you? I need to know if my credentials will be completely removed or just downgraded. He pulled up a terminal on his computer. According to the directive, you're being moved to a standard Tier 2 access profile. Most of your audit access will be revoked, but... He paused, typing rapidly. Your legacy account tied to the original audit framework should still be active. Those credentials are hard-coded into the system and would require a complete overhaul to remove. I nodded, careful not to let my relief show. And when will the transition happen? End of day today? Simon hesitated. Ava, what are you planning? I smiled, the kind of smile that never reached my eyes. Absolutely nothing that would concern it. I just need to ensure a smooth transition. That's all. Simon knew me well enough not to believe me, but also well enough not to ask further questions. He was smart like that. Back at my desk, I discreetly downloaded my personal audit framework, the one I'd built from scratch when our company was still struggling to define its compliance protocols. It wasn't company property, it was my intellectual creation that I'd allowed Strathvale to use. Now, I needed it more than ever. At precisely 11:58 a.m., I stood outside Travis Wentley's office, which had previously belonged to our now retired Chief Risk Officer. The glass walls revealed a young man with carefully tousled hair, designer suit, and the entitled posture of someone who had never earned anything in his life. I knocked precisely at noon. "Come in," he called, not looking up from his phone. I entered, stood at an appropriate distance, and waited. This was the game now. He would make me wait to establish dominance. I had seen this play before from executives twice his age and with actual accomplishments to their names. After nearly a minute, he looked up, his eyes barely registering my presence. "Ah, Alice, right?" "Ava," I corrected him, tone neutral. "Ava Morell." "Right. Well, I need you to understand something from the beginning." He stood up, attempting to use his height to intimidate. "My father may have put you in this position as some kind of charity case, but I expect actual competence. Can you manage that?" The disrespect was intentional, calculated to make me quit. It wouldn't work. I believe my 18 years of experience speak for themselves. "Mr. Wentley, what would you like me to assist with first?" He seemed momentarily thrown by my calm response. "Coffee, black. And then I need you to organize these." He gestured to a chaotic pile of folders on a side table. "They're acquisition proposals that need review." I recognized those folders. They contained my analysis of potential acquisition targets, complete with risk assessments that had taken months to compile. "Of course," I replied, moving toward the small office kitchenette. As I prepared his coffee, I noticed the flash drive he had carelessly left next to the computer, labeled simply MP. It would mean nothing to most people. To me, with my years of tracking documentation patterns, it might as well have been a neon sign. I brought him the coffee and began organizing the folders, noticing immediately that several confidential sections had been haphazardly removed. "These acquisition folders are missing their risk assessment sections," I mentioned casually. Travis took a sip of the coffee and grimaced. "Too bitter." And yes, I removed those. Too much negativity. When building a vision, you can't be constrained by overthinking risk. I nodded as if his words contained wisdom instead of the most basic failure of financial management I'd encountered in 2 decades. "I'll remake the coffee. Would you like me to create a new summary of just the positive aspects of each acquisition?" His eyes lit up. "Yes, that's exactly what I need. See? You can be useful." By the end of my first day as Travis Wentley's assistant, I'd learned 3 crucial things. 1. He was funneling money to a company called Mirage Partners, which appeared in none of our approved vendor lists. 2. He was systematically removing risk warnings from all documentation. 3. He had the passwords to our secure payment systems written on a post-it under his keyboard. When I returned home that evening to my modest 2-bedroom apartment, my 14-year-old daughter Lily was waiting, curiosity etched across her face. "Mom, what happened? You never come home this early." I set down my bag and forced a smile. "Just some changes at work, sweetheart. Nothing to worry about." She frowned, unconvinced. "Is it because of that new guy? I saw his picture in the company announcement Dad forwarded me." My ex-husband Mark had always been supportive of my career, even after our divorce. We maintained a friendly relationship for Lily's sake. "It's just corporate restructuring," I said, unwilling to burden her with the truth. "How is school?" But Lily, sharp as ever, wouldn't be deterred. "Mom, you built that place. Dad always says they'd have gone bankrupt years ago without you." I sighed, pouring myself a glass of wine. "Sometimes, Lily, the most valuable lessons come from watching how people treat you when they think you're no longer valuable." She tilted her head, her expression serious beyond her years. "Are you going to fight back?" The question hung in the air as I considered how to answer. I wouldn't lie to my daughter, but I also wouldn't expose her to the ugliness of what was coming. "I'm going to do what I've always done," I replied carefully. "Uphold standards and document everything." That night, after Lily went to bed, I set up my personal laptop with a secure VPN, using the legacy credentials that were still active, I began systematically documenting everything I'd observed during my first day in my new role. I created encrypted files, organized by date and potential violation, and stored them both in secure cloud storage and on an encrypted external drive. The foundation was laid. Now I just needed to wait and watch as Travis Wentley dug his own grave. Brr. Over the next 2 weeks, I became the perfect assistant. I arrived early, stayed late, took notes, organized files, and made coffee exactly the way Travis preferred it after his initial complaints. I became practically invisible, which was exactly what I needed. The humiliation was calculated and constant. Travis would routinely send me to fetch things that could easily have been delivered, interrupt me in mid-sentence during the few meetings I was allowed to attend, and, forget, to include me on emails directly relevant to tasks he'd assigned me. On Wednesday of the third week, I was summoned to a meeting with the executive team, not as a participant, but to take notes and provide refreshments. I, who had once led similar meetings, now poured water and distributed printouts like a catering staff member. I could feel the discomfort of some of the long-term executives who had worked with me for years. Janet from legal couldn't quite meet my eyes. Christopher from operations gave me a small, sympathetic smile when no one was looking. Travis presented his strategic vision for the company's expansion, and I silently noted every regulatory red flag, every compliance issue, every potential legal landmine. When he proudly announced a new partnership with Mirage Partners for customer acquisition services, I kept my expression neutral while adding another entry to my mental ledger. Back at my assigned desk, a small workspace outside Travis's office rather than the corner office I had previously occupied, I discreetly looked up Mirage Partners. As I suspected, the company had been incorporated just 3 months ago. A little more digging revealed its principal was James Harrington, who had attended the same private university as Travis, even belonged to the same fraternity. I added this information to my growing file, making sure to document the approval process, or rather, the lack thereof, for this new vendor. That evening, as I was preparing to leave, I received an email from an address I didn't recognize. Watchdog ye Proton Mail. Com. The message was brief. They're monitoring login credentials. Be careful where you access. Some of us still remember who built the safeguards. I deleted the email immediately, but felt a small surge of hope. I wasn't alone. Someone else in the company had noticed what was happening and was concerned enough to warn me. The next day, a major payment processing error occurred. Travis had attempted to authorize a payment to Mirage Partners without following the proper validation protocols. The result was a system-wide payment freeze that affected hundreds of clients. I watched as he panicked, shouting at the IT team over the phone while simultaneously trying to reach his father. When Oliver Renshaw appeared in the doorway of Travis's office, his expression was thunderous. "What the hell happened?" Oliver demanded. Travis straightened, immediately shifting into defense mode. "The payment system froze. It says it's some kind of authentication issue, but I followed all the protocols." I kept my head down, appearing busy with organizing files, but I was listening intently. "This affects every client payment in the system," Oliver said, his voice dangerously low. "Do you understand the implications?" Sir. Travis corrected himself, aware of the optics. "I've been trying to streamline some of our vendor payment processes. The system is outdated and—" "Did you consult with anyone before making changes to established protocols?" Oliver interrupted. Travis hesitated, then gestured vaguely in my direction. I had my assistant review the documentation. My head snapped up at this blatant lie. Oliver's gaze shifted to me, questioning. "Mr. Wentley asked me to organize the payment protocol documentation yesterday," I said carefully. I provided the files as requested, but was not asked to review any changes. The look Travis gave me could have frozen hell. Oliver's expression remained impassive, but I could see the calculation behind his eyes. "Fix this," Oliver said to his son. "Today." Then he left without another word. The moment the door closed, Travis rounded on me. "You could have backed me up." I met his gaze calmly. "I can organize your files, schedule your meetings, and make your coffee, Mr. Wentley." I cannot and will not lie about compliance matters. You're my assistant, he hissed. Your job is to make me look good. My job description states that I provide administrative support. It does not include misrepresenting facts to the CEO. His face flushed with anger. Do you know how easily you could be replaced? Completely replaced? The threat hung in the air between us. I gathered my notepad and stood. Would you like me to contact IT to help resolve the payment system issue? I asked, my voice perfectly professional. He dismissed me with a wave, already reaching for his phone. I returned to my desk and immediately documented the exchange, including his attempt to blame me for his circumvention of established protocols. The payment system crisis took 2 days to resolve, during which time our client services team was flooded with complaints. I heard through the grapevine that Oliver had personally called several major clients to apologize for the technical glitch. On Friday afternoon, Travis called me into his office. His demeanor had changed. He was attempting to appear friendly, which was far more concerning than his overt hostility. Ava, I think we got off on the wrong foot, he said, leaning back in his chair. You've been with the company a long time, and I respect that experience. I waited, knowing this sudden change of heart had a purpose. I need to prepare a presentation for the board next week about our strategic initiatives, including the Mirage Partners relationship. I'd like you to help me put it together. Translation: he needed someone with actual knowledge to make his half-baked ideas sound legitimate. Of course, I replied. What specific aspects would you like me to focus on? The compliance and risk management sections make it sound thorough, but not alarming. The board members get nervous about anything that seems too risky. I nodded, keeping my expression neutral despite the internal alarms blaring in my head. Will you provide me with the details of the relationship structure and the due diligence that was performed? He waved his hand dismissively. Just use the standard language from previous partnerships. This is really just a formality. I'll need something in writing confirming that you want me to apply standard due diligence language without actual due diligence being performed, I said mildly. For documentation purposes. His eyes narrowed. That won't be necessary. Just draft the presentation and I'll review it. I spent the weekend creating 2 versions of the presentation. The first, which I would give to Travis, contained carefully worded statements that appeared thorough while actually saying nothing of substance. The second, which I saved to my secure files, detailed exactly what I had been asked to do and the implications for regulatory compliance. On Monday morning, I delivered the presentation to Travis. He glanced through it quickly, nodding in approval. This looks good. I'm going to make a few changes and then send it to the board ahead of Wednesday's meeting. By Tuesday afternoon, the final presentation had been distributed to the board members. When a copy landed in my inbox, Travis had included me on the email to make it appear I'd been properly involved. I immediately noticed that he had added several specific claims about the rigorous due diligence supposedly performed on Mirage Partners. I saved this version to my evidence file, along with my original notes documenting his instruction to use standard language without any actual due diligence information provided. That evening, I received another email from the anonymous watchdog. Board presentation raised eyebrows with some long timers. Keep documenting. You're not alone. The next morning, I arrived at work to find a flurry of activity. The board meeting had been moved up, and Travis was in a state of barely controlled panic. The board chair wants additional details on Mirage Partners, he said the moment I walked in. I need you to put together a comprehensive overview of their track record and capabilities. I'll need access to the due diligence files, I replied, knowing full well they didn't exist. Just make it work, he snapped. You've been here forever. Use your institutional knowledge or whatever. I need it in 2 hours. I returned to my desk and began crafting a document that appeared detailed but contained nothing but generalities and conditional statements. Mirage Partners represents an opportunity to leverage cutting-edge acquisition methodologies, I wrote, rather than Mirage Partners has a proven track record. 2 hours later, I handed Travis the document. He barely glanced at it before heading into the board meeting, confidence restored. I wasn't invited to the meeting, of course, but Janet from legal stopped by my desk afterward, her expression troubled. "Ava," she said quietly, "do you have a minute?" We walked to the small kitchen area, away from prying ears. "What's going on with the Mirage Partners deal?" she asked once we were alone. "The documentation seems thin." I chose my words carefully. "I've provided administrative support based on the information made available to me." Janet had been with the company almost as long as I had. She knew what I wasn't saying. "The board has requested a formal risk assessment," she said. "Oliver asked me to handle it, but—" She hesitated. "This was always your domain. It feels wrong to proceed without your expertise." "I'm happy to provide any support that would be helpful within my current role," I replied. She nodded, understanding the constraint. "I'll send you a template. Perhaps you could review it for formatting consistency." We both knew she was offering me a channel to provide input without explicitly challenging the new hierarchy. "I'd be happy to check the formatting," I agreed. That afternoon, Janet sent me a risk assessment template with a note. "Please review for consistency with company standards. Feel free to add comments regarding formatting structure." I spent hours meticulously adding formatting suggestions that were actually substantive comments about the lack of proper vendor validation, missing background checks, absence of financial stability verification, and potential conflicts of interest. I framed each comment in terms of document structure and completeness rather than content, but the message was clear to anyone who knew how to read between the lines. When I returned home that evening, Lily was sitting at the kitchen table, working on what appeared to be an art project. Colorful markers and paper were spread across the surface. "What are you working on?" I asked, setting down my bag and kicking off my heels. She held up a drawing, a stylized female figure in business attire wearing a cape. "It's you," she said, "as a superhero." I felt a lump form in my throat. "Me, a superhero?" She nodded solemnly. "Dad told me what's happening at your company, how they're trying to push you out even though you're the one who keeps everyone safe." She pushed the drawing toward me. "But they don't know you're actually a superhero in disguise." I picked up the drawing, noting the careful attention to detail. The streak of silver in the hero's hair, the red lipstick, the determined expression. At the bottom, Lily had written, "Mom, protector of truth and justice." In that moment, something shifted inside me. The humiliation and anger I'd been carefully containing transformed into something clearer, more purposeful. This wasn't just about my career or my wounded pride. It was about the example I was setting for my daughter. "Thank you, Lily," I said, my voice steadier than it had been in weeks. "This is exactly what I needed to remember." She smiled, perceptive as always. "Are you going to take down the bad guys?" I carefully placed the drawing on the refrigerator, securing it with a magnet. "I'm going to make sure the truth comes to light," I promised, in the most professional way possible. That night, I reviewed everything I'd gathered so far. The evidence of Travis's incompetence was substantial, but what I really needed was proof of deliberate malfeasance. The Mirage Partners connection was suspicious, but I needed more concrete evidence of financial impropriety. I decided it was time to take a calculated risk. Using my legacy access, I began a systematic review of payment authorizations over the past month. I worked carefully, masking my digital footprint as I had taught the IT security team to do when tracking potential fraud. There it was, 3 payments to Mirage Partners, each just under the threshold that would trigger additional approval requirements. The classic technique of structuring transactions to avoid scrutiny. And each payment had been authorized by Travis within days of his taking over his new position. I downloaded the records, encrypted them, and added them to my evidence file. Then I composed a careful email to Janet. Regarding the formatting review, I noticed some inconsistencies in the reference documents. The standard payment validation framework appears to have exceptions that aren't documented in the current process flow. This might be worth noting in Section 3.2 of your assessment. It was vague enough to provide deniability, but specific enough that Janet would know exactly where to look. The next morning, Travis was uncharacteristically subdued when I arrived. He barely acknowledged me as I placed his coffee on his desk. By midday, the reason became clear when Oliver Renshaw appeared at Travis's office, accompanied by Janet and the chief financial officer. "Ava, we'll need the room," Oliver said, his expression grim. I gathered my notepad and left, closing the door behind me but remaining within earshot at my desk. The conversation was muted, but the tension was palpable even through the glass walls. I could see Travis becoming increasingly defensive, gesturing emphatically while Oliver remained stone-faced. When they emerged 30 minutes later, Janet caught my eye briefly, giving me the smallest of nods. Travis spent the remainder of the day on the phone, his voice occasionally rising in frustration. At one point, I clearly heard him say, "James, you need to fix this. Now." James Harrington, the principal of Mirage Partners, I presumed. That evening, I received a calendar invitation for a meeting the next morning. The subject line read simply, "Audit Committee, Special Session." The attendees included Oliver, the board's audit chair, the external audit partner from Deloitte, and, surprisingly, me. When I arrived at the conference room the next morning, Travis was nowhere to be seen. Oliver nodded curtly as I took a seat at the far end of the table. "Ms. Morell," the audit chair began. "We understand you've been reassigned recently, but given your historical knowledge of our control environment, we'd appreciate your insights on some recent transactions." I kept my expression neutral. "I'm happy to assist in any way I can." The external auditor, a sharp-eyed woman named Lindsay Creighton, whom I recognized from previous engagements, opened her laptop. "We're conducting a special review of vendor onboarding and payment authorization processes," she explained, "specifically regarding a vendor called Mirage Partners." I nodded, careful not to show any reaction. "I'm familiar with the name from my administrative work with Mr. Wentley." For the next 2 hours, I answered questions with precision, never volunteering information beyond what was specifically asked, but ensuring that my responses led the auditors down the right paths. I referenced documented policies and procedures, pointed them to the standard validation checkpoints, and mentioned the normal approval thresholds for new vendor relationships. Lindsay was good, very good. She knew exactly what questions to ask and how to frame them to elicit the most informative responses without appearing to lead the witness. I remembered that she had attended one of my compliance training sessions years ago, when she was still a junior auditor. By the end of the meeting, the picture was clear to everyone in the room. Proper procedures had been systematically circumvented to fast-track payments to a vendor with questionable credentials and clear personal connections to Travis. "Thank you, Ms. Morell," the audit chair said as the meeting concluded. "Your institutional knowledge has been invaluable." I gathered my notes and stood. "Will there be anything else?" Oliver spoke for the first time. "Not at this time. Please return to your regular duties and maintain confidentiality regarding this discussion." I nodded and left, my expression betraying nothing of the satisfaction I felt. The wheels were in motion now. When I returned to my desk, Travis was in his office, his face flushed with anger as he spoke on the phone. He gestured for me to come in. "I need the documentation for all my communications regarding Mirage Partners," he said the moment I entered, covering the phone's microphone with his hand. "I'll need to compile those," I replied calmly. "What specific time frame are you looking for?" "Everything, and I need it within the hour." He uncovered the phone. "No, not you. I'm talking to my assistant." I returned to my desk and began gathering the requested documentation, but only the documents that had been properly logged in the system, not my personal records. As I worked, I noticed Travis frantically deleting emails and searching through his files. Damage control. Too little, too late. I delivered the compiled documentation before his deadline. "These are all the communications recorded in the official channels," I informed him. "Is there anything specific you're looking for?" His eyes narrowed. "You've been with the company forever. Did you know about this audit committee meeting?" "I was invited this morning," I replied honestly. "They had questions about standard procedures." "And what did you tell them?" he demanded. "The truth. Mr. Wentley." I described the standard processes and controls as they've existed at Strathvale for the past decade. He stood abruptly. I need to speak with my father. Hold my calls. After he left, I used the opportunity to document this latest interaction. As I was finishing, a message popped up on my screen from the anonymous watchdog. Audit Committee has requested full access to payment records. ET has been instructed to preserve all data. Storm coming. I sent a single reply before deleting the conversation. Thank you. For the remainder of the day, Travis was absent. Rumors began circulating throughout the office. Hushed conversations that stopped when people saw me approaching. Sympathetic glances from longtime colleagues. By the end of the week, the atmosphere had shifted palpably. Travis appeared only briefly each day, looking increasingly haggard. Oliver was conspicuously absent from the executive floor. On Friday afternoon, Lindsay Creighton appeared at my desk. Ms. Morell, do you have a moment? We have some follow-up questions. I accompanied her to a small conference room where she had set up shop. Once the door closed, her professional demeanor softened slightly. I want to thank you for your assistance the other day, she said. Your insights were extremely helpful. I nodded, waiting for the real purpose of this conversation. Lindsay opened a folder. In reviewing the documentation, we've noticed some inconsistencies in the audit trail for several key transactions. She slid a document across the table. This appears to be a risk assessment summary that was originally authored by you, but was subsequently modified. Can you verify if this is your work? I examined the document. It was indeed my original risk framework, but with critical warnings removed and conclusions altered. The framework and methodology are mine, I confirmed. However, several sections have been modified from my original analysis. Do you have access to the original version for comparison? This was the moment. I'd carefully maintained backups of all my work, including timestamp verified original documents that would clearly show the unauthorized modifications. I believe archived versions should exist in the document management system, I said carefully. All official documents are versioned and preserved as part of our compliance framework. Lindsay nodded. We've requested those archives, but apparently there have been some technical difficulties in retrieving them. We were hoping you might have working copies from before the transition. I maintained a thoughtful expression, as if considering the question. I may have preserved some documentation as part of the handover process. I would need to check my secured files. That would be extremely helpful, Lindsay said. The committee has authorized me to expand the scope of our review to include document integrity and authorization controls. Translation: they were now investigating potential fraud and document tampering. I'll see what I can provide, I promised. That evening, I carefully selected key documents from my personal records, enough to establish a pattern of deliberate manipulation, but not so much that it would appear I'd been conducting my own shadow investigation. I compiled the files on a secure drive and composed a formal memorandum documenting the chain of custody and explaining why I had maintained these records as part of my professional due diligence during the transition. On Monday morning, I delivered the drive to Lindsay directly, along with the signed memorandum. This should provide the historical context you requested, I said. All files are date-stamped and include the original electronic signatures where applicable. She accepted the drive with a knowing look. This is very helpful, Ms. Morell. The committee appreciates your thoroughness. I returned to my desk to find an email from Oliver Renshaw requesting my presence in his office immediately. This was it, either the beginning of my redemption or the end of my career at Strathvale. Oliver's executive assistant ushered me in without a word. He was standing at the window, looking out at the city below. Please sit, Ms. Morell, he said without turning. I took a seat and waited, my posture perfect, hands folded in my lap. When he finally turned to face me, his expression was unreadable. You've been with Strathvale for 18 years. Yes, sir, since the company had only 27 employees. He nodded slowly. And during that time, you've built our entire compliance infrastructure. Along with many talented colleagues, I acknowledged. But primarily, you. He sat down across from me. The audit committee has been reviewing your documentation. Very thorough, very damning. I remained silent, waiting. Travis claims you've been sabotaging him from the beginning, that you resented his appointment and deliberately set him up to fail. I met his gaze steadily. Mr. Renshaw, every document I've provided is time-stamped, versioned, and consistent with the compliance standards this company has followed for nearly 2 decades. Standards that have kept Strathvale from facing regulatory penalties that have crippled our competitors. He studied me for a long moment. Why didn't you come to me directly when you noticed these irregularities? My role was redefined. I replied simply, I was instructed to provide administrative support to Mr. Wentley, which I did to the best of my ability. When official inquiries were made, I provided factual responses. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Precisely as outlined in our whistleblower protocols, documentation, proper channels, no accusations without evidence. I inclined my head slightly but said nothing. Oliver sighed heavily. Travis has been temporarily relieved of his duties pending the completion of the investigation. I will be stepping back from day-to-day operations until the board determines appropriate next steps. I understand, I said, my voice neutral. Do you? He leaned forward. Ava, we've known each other for a long time. Not well, perhaps, but long enough for me to recognize when someone has outmaneuvered me at my own game. I kept my expression placid. I've simply followed the procedures I was tasked with creating and maintaining. Indeed. He stood, signaling the end of our conversation. The board will be making announcements regarding leadership changes by the end of the week. In the meantime, you'll report directly to Janet in legal. I rose. Thank you, Mr. Renshaw. As I turned to leave, he added, For what it's worth, Ava, I didn't approve the changes to your position. That was Travis's initiative, which I foolishly rubber-stamped. I paused at the door. In my experience, Mr. Renshaw, systems only work when everyone is held to the same standards, regardless of their last name. The following days passed in a blur of interviews with auditors, legal consultations, and careful documentation. Travis didn't return to the office. Oliver made brief appearances but largely worked remotely. The rumor mill worked overtime, but no official announcements were made. By Thursday, Janet called me into her office. The board has reached its conclusions, she said without preamble. They'll be announcing leadership changes tomorrow. I see, I replied. Thank you for keeping me informed. She hesitated, then added, Ava, you should know, your handling of this situation has impressed a lot of people, including some who previously underestimated you. I nodded, accepting the information without comment. The next morning, an all-staff email announced that Travis Wentley was no longer with the company. Effective immediately. Oliver Renshaw would be taking a 6-month leave of absence, during which time the COO would serve as interim CEO. There was no mention of my role or the circumstances that had led to these changes. No public vindication, no acknowledgement of the injustice that had been corrected. I hadn't expected any. That wasn't how these things worked. As the day progressed, colleagues stopped by my desk, some offering awkward congratulations, others seeking reassurance about the company's stability.